At the Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, I'm interested in how you're seeing this overall as you look at the broader implications of this crisis. It's affecting every part of the globe. What are the ongoing difficulties? What are the ongoing ramifications for international relations?
Well, we've seen a serious worsening of China-US relations. I don't think the Anglo-Saxon countries are doing all that well. The countries that are doing best are very socially disciplined East Asian countries, Taiwan and Singapore and South Korea, where they can test everybody, they can give everybody a single message and everybody obeys. I was struck by the force of Boris Johnson's lockdown order today. This goes against the temper of the British people. You know, he's asking them to do as they're told, to go home and be quiet and do as they're told. And the whole Anglo-Saxon political and cultural tradition is against that. And it's very difficult to get people to change on a dime. We've seen it in Australia with the sort of she'll be right attitude. We declare a national emergency and everybody goes to Bondi Beach. Well, often that's an endearing quality of the Australian character. At the moment, it's a potentially deadly quality.
It sure is, and let's hope that they can wake up to themselves. That cohort that was responsible in that situation. Greg, what's your view? You spoke about the China-US situation, and there's been an argument made that this is sowing the seeds of further tension in that pivotal relationship. How does it play out across this, what is a presidential election year in the United States?
I think it makes Trump very vulnerable, and you have to worry. This is a crisis almost designed to exploit every shortcoming in Trump and to run away from all of his strengths. So Trump is a truculent leader who, motivates his people to fight against an external enemy. Now, sure as hell, he's going to blame this virus on China. Absolutely. I don't think China's response was perfect, but nobody's response has been very good in the very early stages of this epidemic, and always for the same reason. Nobody wants to admit the bad news too early. Nobody wants to start a panic. For the moment, so the virus is having two contradictory effects. For the moment, it is suspending hostilities because everyone is focused entirely on the immediate emergency of the virus. But Trump's whole re-election strategy was based on good news about the US economy. He can't get his stimulus package through Congress. I think this is a terrible bipartisan failure of American leadership. Every country in the world can get a stimulus package through. The Australian Parliament, which is often as divisive as the American, can get a stimulus package through. But the Republicans and the Democrats can't agree on a stimulus package. The economy is going to take a massive hit. Trump is clearly impatient with the shutdown orders that the medical professionals are telling him are necessary. So I think there's going to be grave concerns about the quality of Trump's leadership here in a way that hasn't been the case with anything else. You know, you can't bluff and bluster against this virus. The medical professionals were not at his side when he made his latest announcements in the last 12 hours. And instead of saying to people, this is a terrible emergency and we're going to do whatever it takes to save American lives, he's saying this is a great nuisance, but we'll be back up happy times again in a couple of weeks. And I think it makes Trump much more vulnerable than he expected to be in November.
When you look at the most likely candidate against him, it's Joe Biden, and you and I have discussed a number of times, he's got his shortcomings, but is this the best possible scenario for the Democratic Party, given who they had to choose from?
I think so. I think Biden was the best of what they had on offer, given all the circumstances. He won the primary, let's be clear, because of coronavirus. Sanders was on a roll until the virus broke out in Washington. Sanders, in Washington state, that is, not Washington, D.C. Sanders was miles ahead in the polls in Washington state, as he had been in California. But, you know, when you're facing a terrible emergency, you don't really want a guy who preaches political revolution and says he's a radical socialist and all that. You want someone who's reassuring. Now, Biden is a flawed, weak candidate, but he has two Well, he has three great strengths. The first is he is universally regarded as basically a decent guy. He certainly helped his son get rich through not crooked, but in unseemly business contacts. That's horrible. But generally speaking, I've read all the memoirs and they all say, even the people who disagree with him root and branch, Joe Biden is a very decent guy. Americans seem to accept that. Secondly, he will appoint a serious cabinet. See, Trump appointed a serious cabinet and then fired them all. And at the moment, he's now surrounded by lightweights and yes men. And you want people who have real traction. You want a health secretary, a defence secretary, people who have some money in the bank with the American electorate. And then thirdly, Biden is a very familiar and by his nature, somewhat reassuring figure. That doesn't mean he wins hands down against Trump, not by any means. Trump is an extraordinarily formidable campaigner. But it might be the worst way for America to negotiate this crisis to be in the midst of a bitter, partisan presidential debate, and the Democrats get their share of the blame too. Surely to goodness they could pass Trump's stimulus package and then try and tack on something more, rather than engaging in the politics as usual. Their chief objective is to embarrass Trump rather than to get the money flowing through to the distressed American economy.
Greg, just finally, you're someone who's watched this nation's politics and our place in the world for a long time. I want to get your broader reflections on this crisis. There have been comparisons with the Spanish flu, with wartime, with the Great Depression. This challenge that faces our nation right now, how do you reflect on that, in a sort of historical sense?
Well, Kieran, this is my second ever Skype interview. The first one was to interview the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong, a few days ago. And he said to me, one of the key things is that you need to start this crisis with a lot of social capital between your government and your people. Now, devastating as the Spanish flu was, devastating as the Depression was, and notwithstanding all the divisions we had in World War II, we had a lot more social capital in our society in those days. We were more cooperative. We tended to do as the government asked us to do in key matters, and we trusted the government more. People trusted Curtin, they trusted Menzies. I think Scott Morrison has done pretty well, although I am shocked at the failures at the airports and with the cruise ships. The innovation of the National Cabinet is a very good idea, and I think it's right that Anthony Albanese is not there. This is a cabinet of government. But on the other hand, the disagreements between the states and the Commonwealth are still shocking, and the failures of the New South Wales jurisdiction in letting that cruise ship in, and the failures of social distancing in airports, the shocking column in the Australian today by my colleague Troy Branston. There's not even hand sanitizer available at Sydney Airport. These are some glaring weaknesses and failures. Karen Andrews yesterday or this morning gave an interview on the ABC saying the next thing she was going to look at was manufacturing, the breathing machines in Australia. Excuse me, this has been running since December and a crisis since January. We're going to look at it now. I do think there is a deep failure in this country, right through the bureaucracy and the leadership, ever to imagine a real crisis. I've written about this many, many times in the defence context, and we're seeing it now. And when a real crisis hits, we are slow, off the mark, and our social capital, I think, is much weaker than it's been for a long time. Having said all that, I think, the events here are going to make people very sober. If people aren't cooperating now, they will cooperate when there are, touch wood that this never happens, 5,000 Australian dead or something like that. And this is going to have impact for a very long time. We're not going to bounce out of this in the short term. Our economy is going to be ravaged. We have a choice between saving lives and sacrificing our economy. I think we have to choose saving lives. This is our biggest challenge since World War II, certainly. And so far I'd give us a pass mark, but not much more than that.
And the wage guarantee, your thoughts on that from Boris Johnson, is that something we should do?
Well, each country is tackling this in a slightly different way. I think the federal government's measures have been reasonable. Some of them are going to be quite ineffective, such as investment depreciations and so on. Who's going to make an investment right now? And loan guarantees. Who's going to take on a loan if they can possibly avoid it right now? But overall, I think the size and speed and urgency of the stimulus package has been quite good. There is a great deal of moral hazard and economic difficulty in any approach that you take. So Boris Johnson's guaranteeing 80% of the wages of anyone who would otherwise have been laid off. Well, is there a single employee in Britain whose boss is not going to say he would otherwise have been laid off? But on the other hand, you've got to expect a certain amount of wastage in this environment, because the priority is to get the money out quickly and to keep as much of the economy functioning as you can, while placing an absolute priority on saving lives. So I don't have a great criticism of the stimulus package. In fact, I think, the government deserves high marks for moving very, very quickly and getting that juggernaut of a Canberra bureaucracy. I mean, they're all good people, they're working hard, but getting them to move this fast in an environment where they don't even know if they're going to be well themselves and how many of them can work from home and so on, is quite an achievement. So, I mean, we're going to have to suck it and see. The government has also said sensibly it's going to be very flexible, and if it has to do other things, it will do them. But, we can only pay for a crisis like this once. We're going to be a much poorer, economically much, much poorer nation on the other side of this crisis. And if the same thing rolls around again in a couple of years' time, we're going to not have the resources that we have today. So we need to look at structural changes about, rebirthing a manufacturing industry, producing the things that we need for our own survival, all of this. That's going to be one of the key requirements after we get through this.
Greg Sheridan, Foreign Editor at The Australian. As always, I appreciate your insights. Thanks.